Okay, hello everyone. It's a great honor to have this opportunity for me to moderate this event. The title of our side event is Keeping the Promise, Leave No One Behind, Social Protection Responses to Forcibly Displaced Children. I am Suna Hanoz-Penney, Director of International Programs at AÇEV, based in Istanbul, Turkey, and at the same time, Policy and Advocacy Chair of the Early Childhood Peace Consortium. I would like to thank the World Organization for Early Childhood Education, OMEP, together with the Early Childhood Peace Consortium, the Federation of American Women's Clubs Overseas, FAUCO, and the NGO Committee on Migration for bringing our esteemed colleagues today from OMEP, NYU Global Ties, the Sesame Workshop, the Fordham University, and UNICEF. Thank you all for the efforts here to build collective understanding and collaboration among researchers and practitioners. We are a big group here and representing so many organizations and institutions where we want to speak about the challenges faced by forcibly displaced children and need for a comprehensive social protection package, particularly including quality early childhood development to reduce and prevent poverty and vulnerability throughout the life cycle. We are holding this event as part of the Commission on Social Development 62, where the theme is fostering social development and social justice to be able to make progress on the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And this year's emerging issue is the influence on digital transformation on inclusive growth and development. So we are lucky to have the speakers here. They'll be able to give us good examples, and I'm looking forward to the next 70 minutes we have together. How about do we have Mercedes on the call right now, Maria Pia?
She just sent a message. I will be there in a few minutes.
Okay. So in particular, we would like to stress that culturally relevant programming is very important, and tailoring for the needs of the forcibly displaced children and their caregivers. I would like to take the next couple of minutes to make some introductory remarks from my side, and then I will ask Mercedes to share her remarks. So as a global community, we're really facing a momentous and incredibly complex challenge. Inequality is on the rise. Conflict is increasing globally, and conflict impacts people of all ages. However, children are particularly vulnerable to violence and neglect. Today, more than 250 million children under the age of 5 are presently living in low and middle income countries where they are at great risk of not reaching their potential. So this reality really has a profound impact on children. And of course, this impact is compounded with the fact that children and parents experience immense stress when they're enduring war and adapting to challenges of displacement. We call this toxic stress, being exposed to adversities at an early age. And this really has, research has shown immense associations with a broad range of negative life outcomes, including significant emotional and behavioral problems. So knowing that children are disproportionately impacted by poverty and war, there are climate disasters, they're exposed to toxic stress that really limits their potential and perpetuates intergenerational cycles of poverty and violence. So in that case, we're really in need of some global solutions that will disrupt these cycles and build strong foundations for a sustainable development, social cohesion, promote a culture of peace. And we believe early childhood development has a significant role to play here, as early childhood is the most formative period of our lives, and intervening at this early stage it has a unique opportunity where it can be cost effective, it can have sustainable impact. But of course, to be able to do all this, we know that we have to come up with some package that is very strategic, a social protection package that is multi-level, not just focused on the child alone, but includes the whole ecosystem around the children. And how can we integrate technology into it? These are the questions, these are the issues we'll be discussing. It will be my pleasure to now introduce Mercedes. Maria Pia, do we have her on the call?
I have no news.
Okay, so then...
she just joined.
Excellent.
She just joined, perfect.
Okay, perfect. So I'd like to introduce you Mercedes Mayol Lassalle. She's the world president of OMEP since 2020, and she's an elected member of the coordination group of the collective consultation of NGOs on education. Nowadays, she's also a member of the board of Global Campaign for Education. At the same time, she's a professor on public policies in Argentina, Buenos Aires University. She was the head of cabinet of advisors of the Minister of Education and General Director for Early Childhood of the city of Buenos Aires. Before I introduce Mercedes, I'd just like to also say we have so many other representatives, country representatives of OMEP on this call. Thank you all for joining. It will be our pleasure to listen to Mercedes. Mercedes, the floor is yours.
And sorry for the connection problems. Good afternoon from Buenos Aires, Argentina. And well, I am very grateful to be participating in this side event and sharing with colleagues who are very committed and working along so many years for the cause of children, as François Dolto said. The priority theme of this 62nd session of the Commission of Social Development is fostering social development and social justice through social policies to accelerate the progress of the implementation of SDGs, mainly overarching goal of poverty eradication. As we all know, education is the catalyst of the 2030 agenda. And if we want to eradicate multiple forms of poverty, violence, and wars, and the uncertainty and risk that the technological and climate change is developing, building peaceful societies, just and egalitarian societies, one of the great tools will be definitely education. And OMEP has been working on some basic pillars: peace, human rights, the Sustainable Development Agenda, the certainty that education is a human right and a tool that enables the realization of other human rights. As the Brazilian pedagogue Paulo Freire said, education does not change the world, but it changes the people who will change the world. During early childhood, the foundations of each person's development and citizenship is formed. And states and adults have an enormous ethic and social responsibility for the lives of children and their well-being. And that is why it is so important to take care to the new ones, as Anna Arendt said. The world, states, and societies have committed themselves to a challenging and inclusive agenda, promising to leave no one behind. It is recognized that every human being has the right to develop fully, and that is a process that begins at birth and even before that. All these intentions are or should be fulfilled through public policies, the systems that all the people has, all the state has. Comprehensive public policies that ensure care and education from the first moments of life are central to the protection of the right to development and to the recognition of the dignity of each child. Young children are today citizens. and also of the future of the societies, future societies, because they are the people who will continue to change the world. But early childhood care and education is more a privilege of a few than a right to all, especially for children in violent contexts or wars, immigration, or asking asylum. ECE public policies are unequal, fragmenting, and heterogeneous, and in order to transform it, we need to develop many changes as well as strengthen social awareness about their importance. Many years ago, OMEP pushed for the inclusion of early childhood education and care in the Sustainable Development Goals. And recently, we have been participating, pushing this in the Global Partnership Strategy for Early Childhood, the Transforming Education Summit, the second World Conference on Early Childhood Care and Education in Tashkent. And the Tashkent Declaration reinforced the importance of these early years and established that state and the international community and non-governmental stakeholders and the UN system has responsibilities, and they should commit with some special task. And one of the guiding principles and strategies of the Tashkent Declaration for transforming early childhood education and care is to enhance legal framework and policies. And that is why OMEP is proposing 5 key issues. Extend the right to education to the youngest one. We do not want to forget children from 0 to 3, guaranteeing the right to education of all the early childhood, also in families and community programs. Guarantee the offer of for free education in order to ensure inclusion and equity. Warrant adaptability and acceptability, articulating the right to education to the right of holistic development, play, and culture. Regulate ECE to provided by non-state actors in order to ensure that young children's human rights are accomplished without discrimination, and reaffirm the protection of human rights that is a binding obligation of states. However, the mere legal recognition for young children's rights is insufficient to guarantee their effective observance and to transform children's reality. And since the Committee on the Rights of the Child had said that it is evident that the protection of rights requires a set of elements, expand programs and services, articulated governance, reliable information and independent monitoring, professional teams, specialized educators, solid budgets to fund policies, programs, and services, and regulations, as I had said. So also a permanent political and social support and awareness of children's rights, because there is too many adult-based perspective and not child-based perspectives in the field. For this reason, between many other strategies, OMEP has proposed a United Nations Decade for Early Childhood Education and Care to guide and strengthen ECE public policies, a new legal framework to guarantee for free access to quality education for all, tax justice and tax systems to support state actions in protecting the right to education and care, and the development of a pedagogy considering human rights, peaceful coexistence, appreciation of cultural diversity, mother tongue, gender equality, play, sustainable development, and citizenship. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was perfect, and thank you so much for staying on time. Now, the next speaker will be Kate. Kate Schwartz is a senior research scientist. Sorry, I switched on my video. Kate Schwartz is a senior research scientist at NYU Global Ties for Children. Her research centers on how to increase child connection, development, and opportunity for children in under-resourced and conflict-affected settings through better supporting the adults in their lives. Kate also teaches graduate level courses within both the Applied Statistics and Applied Psychology programs at NYU Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development. Thank you so much, Kate, for joining our side event. We're looking forward to listening to you.
Thank you. Do we have the slides up? Great.
Yep.
Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to be talking about a wide range of recent work across two key collaborative initiatives that Global Ties for Children at NYU has been lucky enough to be the evaluation partner on, All on Simpson and Play to Learn. You can go to the next slide. These initiatives, all of which are in partnership with Sesame Workshop, focus on expanding access to play-based early childhood opportunities and education within refugee and internally displaced populations. Specifically, we worked with the International Rescue Committee in the Middle East as part of the Syrian refugee response, BRAC, as well as ARCAD and IDDRB, and Bangladesh as part of the Rohingya refugee response, and Innovations for Poverty Action in Colombia as part of the Venezuelan refugee response. The specifics of the projects changed a lot over the past 6 years, most notably to accommodate the need for more remote services as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, which I'll talk about. But ultimately, we ended up evaluating the impact of 5 main programs: a remote phone-based parenting support program for parents and other caregivers of 0 to 3-year-olds in Jordan, a multimedia WhatsApp-based remote preschool program in Lebanon for 5 to 6-year-old children about to start primary school, a viewing of the best of Alan Simpson, a Sesame Workshop Arabic language television show targeting children's social emotional skills and knowledge within preschool classrooms in Jordan, a program consisting of WhatsApp delivered short watch, play, learn videos on math and social emotional skills for families with 3 to 5-year-olds in Colombia, and 5, the addition of a father-focused parenting support program to an existing mother-focused parenting model for parents of 0 to 2-year-olds in Bangladesh. We also did an implementation study of a program in partnership with Jordan's Ministry of Health aimed at infusing early childhood development messaging into well child and vaccine visits in Jordan. In all cases, we worked with both refugee and host community families. And given time constraints, I'm going to just try to distill all of this down to 3 key takeaways across this body of work, if you go to the next slide. First is that remote programming can work, even at ages where we tend to think that effective services need to be in person. That we evaluated this at all is in many ways a fluke of the pandemic, although a very lucky one. Because if we want to increase access to a wide range of social protection and early childhood services, to hard to reach communities, we're going to need innovative solutions in doing so. And that's likely to include remote or hybrid programming. So if you go to the next slide, our strongest evidence that remote models can work comes from our evaluation of the remote early learning program in Lebanon. This was a fully remote preschool program in which families were provided with home learning kits that included art supplies, worksheets, storybooks, and then participated in WhatsApp group virtual classrooms with 5 to 6 parents or other caregivers, where the focus was on supporting the parents in implementing the preschool activities at home with their child. So this means the teachers ran the groups, were largely teaching the parents to then run the program activities with the children, which is not how we typically think of preschool. Parents were also sent links to multimedia learning materials. You can see some examples on the slide, and walked through specific activities to do with their children using these videos, or using learning materials from their kits, or using other common household items. And they were asked to send in pictures and videos of their children doing the activities back to the teachers. This 11-week program was an 11-week program with around 3 calls a week, as well as some one-on-one follow-up as needed from teacher to caregiver, led to an effect size of 0.45 in overall child development as measured by the IDELA delivered remotely, 0.45 or more in child development, literacy, and numeracy, and an effect size of 0.36 in social emotional development and 0.21 in motor skills. For people familiar with those terms, that's in the range of what we see for in-person preschool versus no preschool. So these are incredibly large effect sizes from an 11-week remote program. Next slide. We also have evidence that mass media delivered remotely through WhatsApp in Colombia and in person in preschools in Jordan for these studies, but in many ways kind of an inherently remote delivery friendly intervention, can increase expressive emotion identification skills and emotion situation knowledge, and some suggestive evidence that it could start to impact the emotion response strategies of children, like belly breathing or not having a aggressive response to emotion situations. Although our sense is that there's more needed to strongly affect those outcomes, that those are a little bit more complex outcomes. And while not the primary targeted outcome of our full audio-based parenting intervention in Jordan, we did find that we reduced caregiver depressive symptoms in that study for caregivers who we observed as having comfortable, non-judgmental rapport with the community health volunteer making the calls. So that caveat brings me to our next slide, which I'm going to slightly amend our first key point. So remote programming delivered in ways that support key relationships and build trust can work, even for young children. Across all of our studies, the importance of relationships and trust was key, whether this was in-person trust of one's midwife or nurse providing the child development advice, or remote trust of and connection with the WhatsApp-based teachers or the community health volunteers who were calling in Jordan. So the potentially impersonal nature of remote programming raises the concern that this critical element of relationships and trust could be lost. So I just wanted to center that here as we talk about the possibility of remote programming, that in much the same way that we should always make sure our work is community-based and driven and responding to community-identified needs, we also need to remember that we can't ever take the relationships and the trust out of this work if we want to change what children are experiencing. Next slide. Our second key takeaway, especially in thinking about the potential of remote programming and technology, is to not underestimate the challenges of such approaches. Data access and Wi-Fi were raised as serious challenges in all of our remote studies and may have contributed to why a not unsubstantial number of families did not actually engage in the WhatsApp video sent in Colombia. In Lebanon, families told us about climbing to their roofs to get signal, charging smartphones at the neighbors, using their own limited resources to buy additional data above and beyond what we provided so that children could keep viewing the videos, and much, much more. So I think a next step of this work will be to continue to innovate and adapt more creatively to address access and technology barriers for families working so that remote and hybrid programming really can be accessible for all families. Next slide. And finally, I think this body of work highlights the critical importance of paying attention to community and family needs and where the gaps in service provision are. So one of the reasons I think the remote early learning program was so effective was because it was provided in areas with no in-person preschool options where parents had a really strong desire to give their children educational opportunities. And so it filled a really apparent need, and parent engagement was thus extremely high. If you look at the next slide, this need to look at what we're missing in current programming is also highlighted in our work in Bangladesh with fathers. What fathers need and want from programming is likely different from what mothers need, and there's so very, very few parenting programs focusing on fathers. So in this context, the Rohingyan fathers told us what they were wanting, and they were looking for stress management, anger management, relationship skills. And so that is how the program was created to serve them. And what we found was that we increased both father and mother report of how well the fathers engaged with their children and with the mothers. And in the camps where the father reported impacts were the highest, and the Rohingyan camps was where the program was created. It was then extended to the host community. In the camps, the fathers also reported a really large reduction in the use of harsh and physical discipline with their child. Next and last slide. So indeed, all of our most successful programming filled really clear gaps. No preschool options in Lebanon, low social emotional content in existing preschools in Colombia and Jordan, no father-focusing programs in Bangladesh, or really in very many places. Where we did not see impacts, such as in math skills, which were also a focus of the Watch, Play, Learn videos in Colombia, we discovered later that the content overlapped almost entirely with existing content in the local preschools, where 87% of our sample attended. So in seeking to leverage technological and other innovations and expand our social protection access and services for displaced populations, we need to make sure to form strong relationships with the communities being served and always listen to them and mind the gaps because they know what they are. Next slide. Thank you to our incredible and numerous partners in this work. It's been amazing to be part of this extremely diverse multi-organizational team and to be able to work in these incredible contexts. And sorry for going a minute over. It's a lot of work.
Thank you so much, Kate. It's incredibly interesting. Because we're pressed for time, and since Sherry's presentation will be very complementary to this, I will give the floor to Sherry. So I would love to introduce Sherry Weston. Sherry Weston is president of Sesame Workshop, the nonprofit educational organization behind Sesame Street. My generation, we grew up with Sesame Street. Now my child, she grows up with Sesame Street. So everyone knows about them. Sherry Weston spearheaded a partnership with IRC to bring critical early education to children in the Syrian response, which was awarded the MacArthur Foundation's first ever 100 million grant. The project was later on expanded to children affected by crisis in Bangladesh, East Africa, Latin America, and those who have been forcibly displaced by Afghanistan and Ukraine. Sherry Weston has also held leadership positions in media, nonprofit, and public service. She served as assistant to the president for public liaison and intergovernmental affairs for President George W. Bush, assistant secretary for public affairs at the U.S. Department for Housing and Urban Development, and held senior positions at the ABC television network. Thank you so much. Sherry, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Suna. I am honored to be here. I especially joining this esteemed group of other panelists, and I want to thank all the organizations for bringing us together for this really important conversation. So as many of you do know, Sesame Workshop is the organization behind Sesame Street, and we use the power of media and Muppets, we like to say, to reach children with quality education in over 150 countries, and many of those are places where children do not have access to quality education. We also like to think that those characters, our Muppets, become trusted friends and powerful role models for young children. And they're not just teaching letters and numbers, but they're modeling important qualities like respect and understanding. And we have always focused on the early years because we know that's when we can have the greatest impact. So it's no wonder why early childhood and peace are so connected. You know, this is when a child is forming their sense of self, their sense of the world around them. And it also is when they're learning to trust and perhaps sometimes not trust. So it offers us a unique opportunity to reach them in those formative years and help them to respect and understand differences and to gain empathy. But as Suna mentioned, for over more than 222 million children worldwide are affected by conflict, crisis, climate emergencies, and this really impacts their opportunities to build the skills and resilience that they need to thrive and to lay a foundation for peace. We have proven, and I love the presentation that NYU just shared, we have proven that media can be a powerful tool to ensure that children can continue to learn even when the traditional services and access to education is interrupted. And we always take a local approach to create that media so that it's culturally responsive and reflects children's daily lives. We do believe that children learn best when they see themselves reflected in media and when they can identify with those characters and those storylines. In order to do that well, we always work with the local community. We start with local educators, local ministries of education, bringing in the creative talent, the producers, and the parents and children themselves as we develop programming to ensure that it will be culturally relevant and provide opportunities for children in their own language, in their own culture. And I think one of the best examples of that may be our recent Muppet editions in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. And we have a photo of Noor and Aziz, if that can be pulled up. These are two new Sesame Muppets, very special. And I think one of the most powerful things about Noor and Aziz in Bangladesh is these are the first time, this is really the first time that Rohingya children have seen themselves reflected in media. These are children Muppets that look and sound like them. They're part of our Play to Learn humanitarian program, which was developed to use play-based learning and developmental programming and research to be an essential part of our humanitarian response there. I think there's one other photo as well. But in creating these characters, we conducted extensive research, as we always do, which led to their design. Working with Rohingya children, I remember being in the camp, meeting with fathers and talking to the parents, and so that we could make sure that these characters reflected the Rohingya culture. For instance, Noor is very curious about the world, and Aziz loves to tell stories, which is a huge part of the Rohingya culture. And we even found now that while before Noor and Aziz, Elmo was their favorite character, Noor and Aziz are now Rohingya children's very favorite character, which I think speaks to the power of localization. So we know how valuable culturally relevant educational content is, and we know that regardless of geography, what children need who are affected by conflict and crisis is really the same developmentally, but the context in which we reach them is very different, and the tools which we will use are different because there's different access, high tech, low tech. In the Middle East, we were able to use mass media as well as digital media, WhatsApp and various tools. In the Rohingya community, there was not access to media, not access to technology. So it's much more low tech in terms of storybooks, in terms of parenting materials, direct services for home visits and play labs, and Pico operated, battery operated Pico projectors. So we learned to really contextualize how we reach children and that local culturally relevant content. But I think another example is when you think of some of the things that we just shared from NYU, I think one of those great studies was about our WhatsApp work. And that's, to me, an incredible example of using that powerful tool, using that digital technology that we could load a Hun Simpson in the Middle East, our content on WhatsApp, reach parents who no longer had access to traditional schools during COVID, and to Kate's impressive outcomes, have outcomes in 11 weeks that were equivalent to a full year of pre-K. That's pretty powerful. So as we layer ECD into all opportunities, and I don't mean just our technology and Sesame's media, but layering into other sectors that touch children really increases our ability to have a low-cost intervention, whether it's integrating these learning materials into health clinics or to direct parenting for caregivers, home visits, gives us a tremendous opportunity to increase ECD gains by working across the sector with other partners in health, water, sanitation, gender equity, wherever we can. I think it's just so important that in any way that we're serving children, especially children affected by crisis, that we're looking also at through the lens of a young child. So the other thing I would also say is research is a huge part of our DNA. We were so proud of the outcomes of NYU, our partner on both our work in the Middle East and Bangladesh. And I think I have one last image from that Hun Simpson work that I'll share. But in closing, I'd just like to say, with over 110 million people displaced today, almost half of whom are children, we know this work is more critical than ever. Sadly, these numbers will only increase with climate disaster and other disruptions. But we know if we can reach children in the critical early years, we can help build the foundation they need and give them the chance to rebuild society, which is the best investment we could make in a more peaceful society for all. So thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. That was fantastic. We'll go to Marciana, and then we'll listen to Divya's remarks, and then I'm sure everyone has so many questions to all the speakers. Dr. Marciana Popescu is a professor at Fordham University Graduate School of Social Service and a Fulbright specialist on migration policy. She conducted research on migration policies within the EU space as a Fulbright senior scholar in Austria, and on the impact on women, asylum seekers, and refugees. She's also a member of the UN NGO Committee on Migration, working on global and local migration policies. At the same time, Dr. Popescu is the co-director of the Her Migrant Hub project, a community-based initiative focusing on increasing access and utilization of health and mental health care services for women asylum seekers in New York City. Without further ado, Marciana, we're listening to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. Very happy to be here. A little bit sad because I will kind of like bring a few more grim facts to the conversation. But I'd like to start by saying that, going back to what Kate said, trust and relationships do really matter. And unfortunately, trust and relationships are lost when children are forcibly displaced. So those are the things that we need to keep focusing on. How do we build trust and relationships, right? So if we go back to 2015, Alan Kurdi, a 2-year-old, was washed ashore the Mediterranean Sea. And we found out his name through his death. He was not invisible anymore. And it created a huge public reaction. Unfortunately, it was short-lived. In 2016, I visited a refugee camp in Greece, and I was talking with a girl there, 16-year-old at the time, and she was saying very frustrated about the attempts of the volunteers to always have children focusing on what do they dream to be. She expressed her frustration by saying, "We are nothing but refugees. That's all we are. That's all we'll ever be." Generations of children that are facing this reality. 2024, New York City. We are dealing with an increasing number of migrant families that end up in New York City or in the New York metropolitan area. They are bused here. More recently, they are coming by trains. They have children. They are placed in a city shelter system that, no matter, like, depending on who you are listening to, is overburdened, overwhelmed, or simply ineffective in addressing their needs. While the numbers of children in migration, are huge and are keeping increasing, what is really concerning is that we have over 43 million children as of the end of 2022 that are currently forcibly displaced. And this represents 40% of the totally forcibly displaced population. Not only that, but in 2024, 1 in 5 children are living in conflict areas. The risk of harm for these children is 20 times higher. Children on the move are exposed to multiple effects of, like all these other things that they are now highly vulnerable to. And the impact of that leads to ongoing trauma. Children at the border of the US, the southern border of the US, are going through added incidents, added occurrences that are contributing to their trauma. We're talking about apprehension. We're talking about family separation. Yes, it still happens. We are still dealing with trying to reunite families with children. We're talking about detention for children that should never be detained in any way, shape, or form. In 2023, approximately 76% of all children in the system through migration were over 14, right? But what we are seeing is that these numbers tend to now go lower, right? As of February 1, 2024, we had over 8,000 unaccompanied children in HHS custody. They are staying there for a limited time, some might say, but it could be anywhere between a few days, which is miraculous, to over a month, time in which their access to education, we talked here about such beautiful things, that's early education, using WhatsApp, bringing in toys, things that should not be too expensive, are not too expensive, are not too hard to use, and yet this population is completely deprived of any such resources. As we're looking at what happens in New York City currently, because this is where most of my work is focusing right now, in September 2023, we had 20,000 migrant children enrolled in New York City public schools, and most of them were residing in New York City shelter systems. Which means what? They have a home that is not a home. It doesn't feel like home. They don't spend much time there. Not only that, but through the new provisions, they are moved, they are displaced, their forced migration journeys continue. And through that, they are dealing with losses and challenges. Their losses amount all the way to the loss of childhood, way too early and with massive effects. Their challenges, these are just a few. Besides being invisible, It shouldn't take the death of a child to know their names. They are bullied in school. They are neglected in school. They become responsible for their families because they do have some limited but more access to language and understanding how to navigate the system than their parents. And thus, in the process, we have a lost generation of children or multiple lost generations of children. So what are our current challenges right now? What we are looking at through her Migrant Hub is trying to understand, what are these challenges? What can we do? Where are the resources and what policy efforts do we need to all engage in? So the current challenges, first, the limited availability of the Department of Education liaisons on site at shelters. Not only that, I just found out recently that, there was a contract signed between the city and Westchester County, to place people in the Westchester County to relocate them here. But there was a caveat that children have to be below school age, because somehow we do not have capacity to integrate children in the Westchester schools. I live in Westchester. I dare challenge that assumption. There are long waits for appointments, conflicting information, language barriers, families waiting for hours with children as young as a few months with no toys and nothing to entertain them. That's a fact that is happening right now in New York City, one of the richest cities in the world. Not all students are positioned geographically in shelters to attend schools with multilingual resources. And I want to add another thing here. Most of the shelters do not provide hot meals. I don't want to go any further because we know what this does to the well-being of children. The most recent 30 to 60 day notice for shelter stays actually leads, not can lead, that's mistake of mine there. It leads to mid-school year transfers. It led to mid-school year transfers and disruption in education, but not only that, disruption in the life of children that finally found some safety, some sort of a home environment in their schools, and now they had to move. And I'm almost done. So what can we do? We need to advocate together, come together. Like we are talking about global issues, but we are, we're also part of the global sphere here in New York City. How can we advocate to revoke these 30 and 60 day notices that limit the right to shelter and disrupt children's lives? Increase access, to pre-K and early childhood education. I love the work that was done, in the Middle East, the work that Kate talked about, the work that Sherry talked about. How can we bring such initiatives locally? How can we build such an initiative if they exist already, because some exist, and bring them to scale? So children here would have access to some education. We need to change the narrative, and we need to promote a child-centered migration policy that really focuses on the best interest of the child. This is how we will finally advance the objectives of the Global Compacts. And hopefully we'll make sure that all children have an access to early education, have an access to education, have an access to childhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marciana. I know you have to head to your university class right now. So we'll be going next with Divya. Divya Lata, unfortunately, was not able to join us online on the side event right now, but she graciously sent her pre-recording video so we can listen to it. Let me introduce Divya Lata. She leads the Global Early Childhood Education Program at UNICEF headquarters. Prior to this, working in senior technical and strategic advisory roles in leading international organizations, Divya has advanced child-focused policies and programs in diverse contexts in Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Eastern and Southern Europe. Deeply committed to disability rights, she has a deep interest in advancing early childhood intervention systems for supporting children at risk for disabling conditions. Liana, will you be able to share, Jane, will you be able to share Divya's recording?
Greetings, and thank you for this opportunity to discuss a very important question. Indeed, attitudes towards gender roles, outdated social norms, and stereotypes can significantly impact boys and girls in various ways, limiting opportunities for development and increasing exposure to discrimination and violence, and the profound psychosocial impact these experiences can have on the overall well-being, self-esteem, and identity of the child. Children facing forcible displacement, natural disasters, health emergencies, and other humanitarian situations are especially vulnerable. Amid crises, there is often a tendency to reinforce traditional gender norms as a perceived source of stability, disproportionately affecting women and girls. In the Ukraine war, while many men conscripted, the risk of armed conflict and physical harm led many women and children to leave the country in large numbers, leaving families splintered and forcing women to navigate new societies, norms, and education systems, while also seeking economic security to fend for their children. Disruptions caused by the COVID pandemic have been known to escalate domestic violence, sexual abuse, early marriage, and teenage pregnancies because of poor coping strategies. It is noteworthy that although girls are mostly at a disadvantage when decisions about allocation of scarce resources and limited opportunities are being made, gender stereotypes can be equally detrimental for boys. For example, while girls may be at higher risk of early marriage, human trafficking, and other forms of exploitation, boys could face pressures to conform to traditional notions of masculinity, affecting their mental health and well-being. Girls are often discouraged from pursuing academic interests, especially in science and math, while boys face resistance in taking up traditionally feminine subjects. In either case, these practices not only limit the development of a diverse set of skills in both boys and girls, but in fact shape gender identities, expectations, and aspirations that go on to have a profound impact on the life choices, outcomes, and inequities faced by girls and boys. Children begin to understand gender-related expectations within the first few years of life and can imbibe well-formed notions around stereotypic roles and capabilities of girls and boys by age 6. Parents are typically primary agents of gender socialization and may consciously or unconsciously transfer gendered behaviors and expectations to their children. In organized learning settings, despite global gender parity in access to pre-primary education, gender biases and stereotypes are frequently reproduced in teacher-student interactions, play, pre-primary education curricula, and teaching and learning materials. It is important to deconstruct these biases and stereotypes from a young age, and early childhood programs can play an important role in this regard. Let me share a few examples and strategies from countries who have addressed the issue in a significant way. Taking a comprehensive approach, Vietnam, as one of the few countries with enrollment of over 92% in pre-primary education with gender parity, has pursued measures around curriculum review, teacher training, and parent engagement, supported by sustained policy commitments to build a more gender transformative ECE system. Adopting a gender-responsive pedagogy developed by the international nonprofit organization VVOB and the Forum for African Women Educationalists, FAWE, South Africa, Vietnam, and Zambia promoted practical instruments to enable teachers and school leaders to reflect on their own gender biases and beliefs when interacting with children, with transformative results. Early childhood programs that adopt gender-sensitive materials to depict men and women in diverse roles can also go a long way in laying the foundations of empowered gender identities among young learners. It is also well known that children learn best when from what they observe around them. Pre-primary education can help create the conditions and environment for positive gender socialization of children through parents, practices, and beliefs and knowledge. Strategies to enable fathers and mothers equal involvement in caregiving, play, and learning activities are crucial to build strong and gender-responsive family preschool relationships. The Accelerated School Readiness Program in Mozambique supported parent-to-parent education sessions incorporating discussions on household decision-making processes to promote more equal roles among fathers and mothers. In Sweden, preschool teachers reported implementing strategies to engage fathers and mothers equally in supporting the child, calling both parents when a child is sick, raising issues with either parent who is present at the school instead of only reaching out to the mother. Pre-primary education itself is a highly feminized subsector. More than 90% of pre-primary teachers globally are female. This not only limits the ability of learning environments to counteract traditional gender roles, but also perpetuates lower salaries and benefits for the workforce. Norway has used targeted measures in successive national education action plans to recruit more men in pre-primary education, including establishing a network for men in kindergarten, tripling the number of male teachers in pre-primary education in little over a decade. With a view to improving employment conditions and professionalization of pre-primary workforce on a system-wide scale, the Ecuadorian government rolled out training for community childcare workers, enabling them to obtain a technical degree and become eligible to receive the minimum wage and full social security benefits, thereby enabling them to earn a proper wage while also maintaining quality of education services. Finally, early childhood programs that are designed to support primary caregivers, foster their well-being and economic empowerment, support gender equality in a large way. Given the large number of single Ukrainian mothers and young children displaced by war, play and learning hubs established to fill critical gaps in services for young children have also been used to relieve mothers and caregivers' stress and to free up their time to seek immediate and urgent social supports while their children could access early learning and care in organized settings with trained and trusted facilitators. Chile has invested in significant expansion of formal early childhood education services, adjusting service modalities to provide full-time and extended care according to the needs of working mothers. In another example, using public-private partnerships, the Malaysian government proposed tax incentives for employers that established workplace-based childcare facilities as a measure to encourage women's participation in the labor market. Inspired by these and other examples, UNICEF is pursuing evidence-based strategies for tackling gender inequality from the early years, developing effective gender transformative strategies across 5 key components of ECE systems, namely policy and planning, curriculum and pedagogy, workforce development, engagement of parents, families, and communities, and the development of quality benchmarks and standards. There is an urgent need to proactively and explicitly incorporate gender responsiveness into the design and implementation of early childhood services and boldly promote gender transformative strategies within a system-wide perspective. Thank you very much and have a good rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, this is great. So we've listened to all our speakers. And now I would like to open the floor to an open discussion. This is our Q&A session now. We have about a little more than 15 minutes. I'm looking at the audience. Would anyone like to raise a question? I know I have my questions. So why don't I start? I'll start with Mercedes. So Mercedes, we know that OMEP is promoting a UN decade for early childhood education and care. Can you explain the main objectives of this initiative and how, like, its relevance in a social protection system?
Well, thank you for the question. Well, throughout its history, the United Nations system has placed on the international public agenda a series of issues based on declarations of days, weeks, years, and decades. And OMEP is willing to propose we know we need to join at least 11 countries all over the world to declare by the United Nations a United Nations Decade for Early Childhood Care and Education. And it has really, it's an enormous tool. It has a lot of importance since it would offer a set of guidelines and strategies in terms of policies to governments that can use to guarantee the early childhood holistic and comprehensive policies, and in connection with the enshrined rights. I was thinking in the last word of Martiana, she said we need to work on the best interest of the child. That is a principle of human rights and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And the main objective is to place early childhood in the center of the agenda. Early childhood is always hidden, and promoting a creation of a broad world movement to increase efforts to holistic protection. And the objectives means to develop criteria about universal and sustainable services and programs, comprehensiveness in the approach and in the governance, public and private financing, tracking and monitoring public policies and best practices, inclusion and participation of families, children, communities, and children from birth, because children have their own languages. And of course, improve the coverage and the quality, and taking into account that children have their own culture, and their own culture is connected with play, so and with art, languages. So this can be one of some of the main aspect or objective that could be inside the proposal of the decade. And nowadays, we have been working only with the Latin America and the Caribbean countries through an initiative with the Institute of Early Childhood and Adolescence of the of OAS, and really we have an opportunity to push this idea inside the UN, and of course I count on your help and your collaboration, and because OMEP alone cannot develop such a project. We need our friends, our colleagues, and all the people that are advocating for early childhood education and care and human rights. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. This is a product of a combined collaborative effort, but we really also appreciate for OMEP's efforts for promoting a UN decade for early childhood education and care. Thank you. So I'll switch to Kate. Kate, you shared the key findings of your program research, and tell us a little bit more about what families do we think these programs are likely to work or not work for. So for whom do we need further innovations and adaptations to be able to reach them better? Because you've been doing research in so many countries in a very scaled up environment, so there's quite a bit of learnings there for all of us.
Yeah, happy to. I didn't have time to get into that in my presentation, so thank you. One really exciting point is that the remote early learning program works equally well for all families. So I think one of our stereotypes might be not only that you can't do remote school for really small children, but that it wouldn't work. You can't leverage parents in that way unless the parents themselves are highly educated. And it worked just as well for illiterate parents who talked about learning to read alongside their child. It works just as well for all education levels, which is really exciting. In terms of adaptations needed for other programs where we weren't seeing that kind of universal impact, the father program in Bangladesh actually worked best for those experiencing the most adversity, which is great from a equalizing point of view, but there were lower impacts for families that had less. So I think that might be a targeting, and different families might need different things. And the WhatsApp videos is an interesting one, because we had everything from families who reported getting the new video and watching it and then scrolling back through all of the existing videos in the thread and watching all of them and are showing hundreds of hours, to hundreds of families out of 900 who never opened a single video. And so I do think there's a lot more to learn about who is opening and viewing those videos and who's not, and what some of the barriers are. And we collected a fair amount of data on that. We're still looking at that implementation data. So by May, I will have a full draft of a implementation paper all focused on which caregivers do and do not open and watch videos and what we think we can learn from that. But I do think there's a lot to understand. We talk about things like WhatsApping videos as being inherently scalable, and they're inherently scalable if all families will open them. But if there's a type of family that's not likely to open them, then we need to understand how to best serve those families.
Thank you. So implementation research, we're grateful to that because it'll give us all information about what works and what needs to be still modified.
Suna, may I add one point to Kate's excellent answer? One of the things that I think, or at least, I'd love to say that the entire reason the outcomes were so great from the remote learning program is because it was Sesame's amazing content. But, if you think about the fact that in 11 weeks, the outcomes were the equivalent of a full year of in-person preschool. And that was in literacy, numeracy, social emotional skills. But to Kate's point, I think one of the most powerful added benefits is learning that worked for those parents who were less educated as well as those who were more educated, because usually that really affects the outcomes. But understand that it wasn't just giving them the material on the WhatsApp or the content. It was that our partners on the ground, the IRC, had trained facilitators who called the groups of parents twice a week. And in those calls, they were encouraging and facilitating how to use the WhatsApp content with their children. So I agree that this content is very powerful in this vehicle, but the fact that we were orchestrating, you were ensuring that there was increased engagement between parent and child, and you knew it was at least twice a week because those calls were organized twice a week. And that's why I think those outcomes were so strong in 11 weeks.
Thank you, Sherry. Kate, in fact, says it adds up to 31 calls over 11 weeks, like you're saying. So that support system really gives them a bit of a nudge, I guess, right? A behavioral.
Well, and it's combining the technology using WhatsApp with that human interaction and facilitation, which I think makes it much more powerful.
And that's just the group calls. The teachers were incredibly committed in that program and did follow-up calls as needed when they saw that a family was struggling. The family sent in videos and pictures of their kids doing the activities. There was just an incredible level of engagement with the materials. And it was some multimedia and some in-person stuff with the art supplies that were delivered and some recommendations on how to make Play-Doh with flour that was already in your house. And it was really an incredible range. We have a qualitative paper on that I can share with people if they're interested, in addition to the impact paper, where it's the quotes from teachers and caregivers are just really incredible to understand the degree of commitment by all participants and how much they did in this program, which helps explain the 11 weeks having the impacts it did.
That's great. That's absolutely great. On our earlier comment that Mercedes shared, on the UN Decade of Early Childhood Development, a participant from our audience, Elizabeth Koffler-Schumann, has reminded us that there is a complementing initiative. Elizabeth, would you be able to share it, or would you like me to read your message? I'll go ahead and read it. So she's reminding us that the Human Rights Watch circulated a petition some time ago to add an optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, making pre-primary and post-primary education mandatory. There's another question. Am I saying the name correct?
Can I say something?
Oh yeah, please.
Yes, this initiative is part of the Tashkent aims to change the legal framework around early childhood education and care, and also we are working together with Human Rights Watch, with the Right to Education Initiative, with the University of Oxford, and with some other people that I can't remember from other organizations in Switzerland, in Geneva, and also with the human rights reporter of the human right of education, because we know that the problem is that early childhood education is not in all the documents, in all the legal framework, it is not said that it is for free. And we know that there are huge inequalities in the world. And due to that, young children, most of the young children cannot access to early childhood education and care programs or institutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mercedes. There's another participant who's asked a question. Am I pronouncing the name correct? Diziri Salim. I'll ask the question. What are some examples of early childhood advocates engaging with advocates of older children to discuss the continuity of ECE work?
I gave some answers in the chat, although I think there's much more that could be said.
Do you want to just say a few? It's probably perhaps easier for everyone to hear it.
Sure. Well, I was saying, so Sharon Wolf did some really great work with early childhood education teachers in Ghana, and then has followed up the study through, I think, 5th grade now. So some of that might speak to it. I'd have to think of the specific. There's a lot of papers in that body of work. But overall, I think this is something we need more of, especially because I think what happens often when we're talking a lot in our work about the power of play is that play just abruptly disappears in primary school, even though actually play is still really important in 1st and 2nd and 3rd, and I would argue all the grades. I would argue adults could use a little bit more play. But also that the IRC has been working in Iraq to train 1st grade teachers for the 1st month of school on early childhood education principles and play-based principles in order to like ease that transition and infuse more play-based curriculum into 1st grade. So not an impact evaluation there, but some really interesting implementation work that we kind of worked with them on a little bit, but is primarily their work.
Perfect. Thank you, Kate. I'm aware of time. We have 2 minutes left. And just before, I'd like to ask Sherry a quick question. Since I'm also representing the Early Childhood Peace Consortium here, can you tell us a little bit about Sesame's work around social cohesion? And of course, the climate emergencies are driving more and more forced displacements. How is Sesame thinking about this issue? If you can give your thoughts on these.
Sorry, I'm coming back on camera. I'd be happy to. I mean, excuse me, I was coughing before, which is why I went off. In terms of social cohesion, I would say, and I'm mindful of how little time we have, but you know, when we create content to reach children who've been affected by conflict or crisis, our immediate curriculum is focused on social and emotional well-being, building resilience, overcoming trauma, et cetera. We're also able to fill the void in terms of basic learning because there's often a disrupted access to education. But as those conflicts or displacements are protracted, that's when we really start to add more content around social cohesion. Because we know even when children are immediately welcome, having been displaced, the longer they're together in another country, there start to be certain resentments of what resources, limited resources. It's often a poor country where the native children also have, you know, challenges in terms of resource allocation and access. So we do a lot at that point about respect for differences, celebrating one's own identity and culture, and also building a sense of empathy and understanding. So I think social cohesion is such an important goal and an important aspect to be infused into the work and the content we provide for children in these settings. And in terms of climate, I would say the same. We all know there's going to be even more displacement, if not conflict, climate disasters. So we know we can be there. We know we have tools to reach children when they're displaced or disrupted, regardless of the cause. But I think there's also an opportunity to be creating content, creating curriculum that is specifically addresses some of the inherent challenges of climate disaster the need to build climate resilience, if you will, through the lens of young children. And, so many people are trying to do more and more to address climate issues, often technology or carbon recapture, but looking at the human element, the human impact, and also, as always, for us to say, don't forget looking at it through the lens of young children, to give them the creative problem-solving skills they need, to help them build resilience, to, as they form their sense of identity, to think of themselves as stewards of the environment, and, of course, the basic STEM and environmental literacy content that would be very valuable. So I think those social cohesion and addressing the impact on children of climate is a really important thing for us to all think about how we can best provide. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. I'm glad you had a chance to touch upon those 2 points. I'm wary of time. Thank you so much. There are comments in the chat saying great work by the team of Sesame Street on contextualizing their approach to reflect the local cultures and working with children in migration, how the initiatives presented have considered the preservation of children's mother tongues is another question. Looking at the time, I'm pressed. I'm thinking we need to end it, but this is what we will do. We will be sharing this recording and disseminating it, and we will have the slides, and everyone's emails will be there, so we can follow up with emails, questions through email. Thank you so much. We would, I guess, as we're ending, I'd like to stress that yes, culturally relevant programming is very important. And we're grateful to the research that's being done in this area by our colleagues, and also all the advocacy work that our colleagues are pressing for. Thank you so much. I will be ending the session here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.